We have the market reaction and whether oil prices are going to surge after Iran's attack on Israel coming up on Business Matters. Good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining me here today. I'm Don Ma. So we're going to start off the show with one of the biggest news that happened over the weekend. And of course, that was Iran's attack on Israel. Specifically, we're talking about here oil prices. Now, the good news is that there's a general belief among oil investors, for now at least, that there isn't going to be impact on oil. Its prices have fallen after Iran's weekend attack on Israel proved to be less damaging. And, this is easing worries of the risk of broader regional contagion that could, if it did happen, could displace crude oil barrels. So Iran telegraphing it as well, that it was considering retaliation actually helped lower the geopolitical temperature in this sector. And because of Iran's warning ahead of time, an attack was largely priced in over the days leading up to it for some. There was also limited damage and no oil supply was actually disrupted, so that's good. So let's move on to US stocks. It's a different story here from oil. Markets closed sharply lower today amid geopolitical tensions between Iran and Israel. S&P 500 had its biggest one-day percentage drop since January 31st, as you can see from the numbers here. So markets initially actually during the day was up, but that gain was faded over the concerns of the conflict between Israel and Iran could continue further. And with that, Treasury yields jumped with the benchmark 10-year U.S. Treasury note hitting its highest level since November. Stocks have also struggled recently with the S&P 500 suffering 2 straight weeks of declines and its biggest weekly percentage drop since October last week. This is also as investors have pushed back expectations for the timing and size of any rate cuts from the Federal Reserve. Now we're going to bring in a real expert on everything oil related. We're joined by industry veteran Tom McNally, president of TJ McNally and Company. Tom, great to have you here with us. Let's get down to business here. What is the story with oil now that after what happened in the Middle East over the weekend?
Great to see you, Don, as always. Yeah, I think that what we've seen is without evidence of significant threats to the physical structure of the oil complex. Remember, oil is a physical business. Without damage to refineries, pipelines, production facilities, tankers, the market kind of traded flat and flattened out. It looked like the tit for tat, still is dangerous and escalation is still a risk, but the market traded flat and even down a little bit earlier because nothing of significance was hit or damaged. There's a lot of money at stake in the oil space, and I think that there seems to be an attempt to avoid maybe doing damage to the complex.
Can you just elaborate further on the subdued reaction of the oil market? So you mentioned that nothing physical was actually damaged. Was that the primary concern for this reaction, or was it the reaction based on what they think will happen in the future?
Well, trader, it's definitely the latter. Where are we going, right? And I think that the reaction, and it may not be correct, but the reaction was that there's a bit of a tit for tat between the Iranians, the Israelis and their allies, and there is a sense that escalation would be very dangerous, could lead to a much wider war, and there'll be a lot of effort spent to avoid escalation. Doesn't mean there won't be escalation, but the market, I think, wants to believe that there won't be significant escalation to the point where you have the physical damage to actual oil infrastructure, natural gas infrastructure. It's not clear that that won't happen, but over the weekend, I think that's how markets read the activity and the sort of the back and forth that we're seeing.
And let's continue on this point of escalation. Of course, if it did escalate, it could potentially impact oil in a big way, but I want to hear it from you. Just lay it out simply for us. What would happen with oil prices if something physical actually was damaged?
I think that oil prices could spike if there is a broader escalation and the indication that this would be a full-blown regional war drawing in a lot of other major powers. But that's a big deal. I mean, I'm talking about a much wider conflict with much more highly developed combat operations that could damage oil and gas infrastructure, the Hormuz Straits, et cetera. So I think that what is different now, the United States and Canada and North America able to produce a lot more crude, that the price spikes that you'd see like in the 70s and 80s are harder to get to. I don't think it would be that significant because there's a lot of production that can come from other parts of the world to make up for lost barrels in areas where there might be combat operations.
So I also want your comments on this. So with the reaction being a bit subdued for oil, what do you think is driving the movement of oil right now? Because for some, it's sort of wait and see.
It's still a supply and demand calculus, as it generally is. If you take away the geopolitical threats, you still have the ability for there to be a lot of supply. I mean, Russia's sending barrels around the world. The Iranians are producing barrels. North America has tremendous amount of production capacity to increase. You've heard me before talk about the ability of the United States to get to 15 million barrels a day. I don't know if we'll get there, but it's definitely possible. The resources exist in the facilities. So I think that there's still a supply-demand balance. There's demand, particularly from the developing world. Asia is still very thirsty for oil. So that's the primary driver of where we are in prices. And I think the geopolitical element is serious, but it's still going to be in the context of supply and demand, how long a geopolitical crisis lasts, and the ability of other areas to bring barrels to the market.
All right, we just got about 15 seconds here. Real quick, barring what's happening in the Middle East, if the status quo maintains, what is your outlook on oil?
We're still in this trading range. I still think we're in this range where we are now in the mid-80s, and I still think over time there's more downward pressure because there's a lot of supply that could come on. At these prices, margins are very good, and producers are incentivized to produce oil at these prices.
All right. Thank you very much, Tom McNally, president of TJ McNally and Company.
Great to see you. Thank you very much.
All right. Staying with the crisis in the Middle East just a bit longer, flight routes have reopened after a global disruption. At least a dozen airlines had to cancel or reroute flights in the last 2 days. This was in response to Iran's attack on Israel, of course. So more than 300 missiles and drones were launched at Israel. Most of them were shot down by Israel's US-backed missile defense system. One aviation expert said this was the biggest single disruption to air travel since 9/11. Think about that. Now, Israel, Jordan, Iraq, and Lebanon have resumed flights in their airspace. Major Middle East airlines have also resumed operation in the region. And the other big news of the day, no surprise, Donald Trump became the first former president to go on a criminal trial in U.S. history today. Very big deal. This is the case where Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg accused Trump of falsifying business records in making a hush money payment to adult actress Stormy Daniels. Today is the first day of jury selection where potential jurors are screened for the trial. Dozens of them were excused, actually, after being asked whether they believed that they could be fair and impartial. Now, the former president was in the courtroom today, and again, he blasted the case as political persecution. So with the trial happening, what else comes to mind for some would definitely be Trump's media company, right? But Trump's media shares plunged 18% today. This came after the company's plan to issue more stock was made public. So the company went on, and the stock value had rocketed higher leading up to that initial public offering, but it lost some more than 60% of its value from the peak on March 26. A new stock offering now could help the struggling companies stay afloat, but there's a catch here. And what that is this new offering of 21.5 million shares would decrease the value of the current shares. Trump himself has lost billions since the company went public. And investment banking, let's talk about that. It appears to be making a profitable comeback with Goldman Sachs. The New Year Bank's first quarter profit beat Wall Street estimates. It rose 28% from a year earlier. It reached the highest earnings per share since 2021, according to LSEG data. Investment banking was a big factor here, and the bank earned more than $2 billion in investment banking fees. And that's up 32% from a year earlier. And at the same time, Goldman Sachs has slimmed down consumer banking operations, which, by the way, lost the company billions of dollars. All right, talking about Tesla for a bit. The company is reportedly slashing its staff, and a senior VP is out. The electric vehicle maker is going to lay off more than 10% of its global workforce, according to an internal memo. A source says some employees in California and Texas have already been notified. Tesla has been struggling with sales. Despite cutting prices, global vehicle deliveries in the first quarter fell for the first time in nearly 4 years. And as of December, the company employed 140,000 people. Meanwhile, Tesla's senior vice president of powertrain and energy engineering, Drew Bellingo, shared on X that he is leaving the automaker after 18 years. Another VP of public policy and business development, Rohan Patel, has also reportedly left. Staying with business and companies here, Samsung is the #1 spot as top cell maker over Apple, due to Apple's smartphone shipments dropping in the first quarter of 2024, as well as being hurt by intensifying competition by Android smartphone makers aiming for the top spot. Let's go to NTD's Sean Marshall now for more.
Samsung has claimed the title for world's #1 cell phone maker for the first quarter of this year, surpassing Apple for the lead spot. As according to figures out over the weekend from research firm IDC, it estimates Apple phone shipments dropped about 10% over the first quarter of this year. That saw its market share slip to 17.3%. Burton Kelso, someone familiar with the cell phones industry, said despite Apple having better support from the App Store and from the Genius Bar, online tech support, and better security.
But people just aren't interested in those things. They want flash, they want better cameras, they want a easier to phone. And also, Samsung has a better price point than Apple devices. Apple devices seem to become so obsolete quickly. And I think people are tired of paying $1,500 or more for an iPhone that's going to be obsolete in a year, where you can almost get the same product with a Samsung and pay a little bit lesser price for a better quality product.
The iPhone maker appears to be suffering as rivals step up competition. South Korea's Samsung launched new flagship models over the period, driving a strong rise in sales. Just 3 weeks ago, Samsung said they expect even better earnings than analysts predicted. They said first quarter operating profit will jump over tenfold to almost $4.9 billion.
So one of the other things with Samsung devices is that they were early adapters of the USB-C. And with that, that means if you get a Samsung phone, you can charge it with just about anything. With Apple now being a late adopter of USB-C has kind of turned people away from using iPhone.
China also looks like a problem for Apple, with industry experts estimating its sales there were down by almost a quarter in the first 6 weeks of the year. Some companies and government agencies are restricting use of its phones in the country, citing national security concerns. Those moves mirror U.S. government restrictions on Chinese apps on security grounds. Sean Marshall, NTD News.
Thanks for that, Sean. It looks like a good day for Samsung. And not just because it's beating iPhone, but The Biden administration is going to be writing a $6 billion check to Samsung Electronics. This is going to be for its computer chip manufacturing and research facilities in Texas. The funding comes from the CHIPS and Science Act. Now, the law is working toward reviving the production of advanced computer chips domestically, and this comes, of course, as competition over advanced technology has escalated between the US and China has become a growing national security concern. The Biden administration has also provided funding to other chip makers, including Intel and Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. Okay, going to break, but coming up after, is China and Russia working closely together to try to avoid taxes? We'll tell you about the unusual tactic that the two countries are employing together. And tax day, arriving finally, officially. Americans seems like sunk an estimated 6 billion hours into filing taxes. Now, does that sound like a long time? Well, what if I told you this is actually an improvement on wasted tax time, according to an expert, coming up after the break.
I didn't ask to lose my mother or to be abused at 5 years old. I didn't ask to be kicked out of my house with nowhere to go. I didn't ask for any of this. But I did ask for help, and Covenant House was there. Thanks to their love and support, and to generous people like you, I got what I needed to take control of my life.
For the young people who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations, Covenant House is there providing safety, hope, and a brighter future. Call or go online now. For a gift of only $19 a month, just 63 cents a day, you can provide hot meals, safe shelter, medical care, and love to more than 2,000 young people who sleep at a Covenant House every night. 1 in 10 young adults will experience homelessness this year. Your gift can help reach them when they need it most.
I didn't ask for my parents and my family to disown me. I didn't ask to end up in a homeless shelter. The beauty of it all is that I found Covenant House.
The need is overwhelming, but your monthly support will make sure no young person is ever turned away. Call or go online right now to safeplacetosleep.org with your gift of just $19 a month. With your monthly donation, you'll receive this soft, comforting blanket as a reminder of the warmth and safety your gift will provide a young person tonight.
Covenant House really helped me and really helped mold me into the woman I am today. If there's no Covenant House, where would I be today?
Your monthly gift is urgently needed to reach young people in communities like yours who didn't ask to be put in unthinkable situations. Show them they're loved and not alone. Call the number on your screen or go online to safeplacetosleep.org.
Is deep sea fish oil really healthy? Due to pollution in the oceans, most fish contain heavy metal elements and radioactive substances. That's why it's so important to choose a pure source of omega-3. Puritang green vegetable omega-3 is made from purslane and perilla seeds, which are rich in nutrients and minerals, especially vitamins A, D, E, calcium, and iron. With natural processing and no harmful chemical additives, it has more than 90% concentration of omegas-3, 6, 7, and 9. It effectively improves brain power and is beneficial to the heart's health. Puritang omega-3 does not smell of fish and contains no pollutants, so both adults and children can safely and easily consume it over a long period of time. Puritang green vegetable omega-3, greener, healthier, and more effective. Visit puritang.com to learn more.
All right, just a few quick headlines for you to keep you up to date on what's happening today. Top Wall Street brokerages started Reddit coverage with doubts over user growth. JP Morgan began with a neutral rating and a price target of $47. Morgan Stanley had an equal weight rating and a $45 price target. And US retail sales increased more than expected in March, and this is boosted by a surge in sales at online retailers. Strong retail sales prompted Goldman Sachs to boost its gross domestic product growth estimate for the first quarter. And analysts expect copper's bull run will stretch for at least the next 3 years, and this is fueled by supply challenges and high demand to power energy transition and AI technology. Copper prices are forecasted to hit $12,000 a metric ton by the end of 2026. And as prices and demand for copper soar, it seems like China and Russia appear to have found a way to skirt taxes on the metal. Now, sources are saying that copper wire rod is being shredded to look like scrap metal. And this allows both exporters and importers to profit from differences in tariffs. So let me explain here. The discrepancy in sales data supports the alleged practice. Chinese custom data show China has bought significantly more copper scrap from Russia since December, while Russian figures showed the amount of scrap exported to China at negligible. Now, Russia has turned to China for its exports after the US imposed sanctions on Russia for invading Ukraine. In response, the US and the European Union have imposed sanctions on Chinese companies for supporting Russia. And of course, today is tax day. You don't need me to remind you, but have you filed your taxes? If the answer is no, well, actually, don't blame yourself because there's actually a really good reason for that. To explain, I spoke to Executive Vice President at the National Taxpayers Union, Brandon Arnold. Brandon, great having you here today. So your organization had a really interesting report released, and of course today is tax day. So tell us what you found in this report.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable how much time people spend on their taxes each and every year. It is such a headache for average Americans. This year, we're projected to spend about $6.5 billion with a B hours completing our taxes. That's individuals, that's businesses, that's everybody. It's a huge deadweight loss. It's a huge time suck that people spend doing their taxes, stressing out, going over those receipts and those forms and so forth, when they could be doing, any number of things, spending time with their family, working. Virtually anything is better than doing your taxes.
And of course, I think I already know the answer to this, but I want to hear from you. Why are people spending so much time on their taxes?
Yeah, unfortunately, the tax code is incredibly complicated. Now, in 2017, the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act simplified the tax code quite a bit, and we actually had over 8 billion hours dedicated to doing our taxes back then. So it has fallen significantly down to less than 7 billion, but it is still way too complicated when you're talking about all of the credits, the deductions, the paperwork, the headache. It is very, very complicated for families and businesses alike to complete our taxes. We really need more tax simplification, more dramatic tax simplification to alleviate this massive burden on Americans.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, but why, right? Why is it so complicated? Why can't they just make it as simple as possible for the average American?
Well, I think we try to disperse so much in the way of policy through our tax code. We try to provide incentives for people to work, the earned income tax credit to help the working poor. We try to provide subsidies for people that are saddled with the cost of raising children through the child tax credit. We try to offset the cost of so many things that people do through what has become an increasingly complicated web of tax provisions. Of course, every tax provision has its beneficiaries, whether there's a narrow interest group or a broad interest group, they all have beneficiaries, and therefore it's very difficult to scale back or simplify the tax code, because anytime you talk about eliminating a deduction or eliminating a credit, the people that benefit from it go bananas, and they get very frustrated with the prospect of losing these tax provisions. So tax simplification is an incredibly difficult process. We learned that in 2017. We've learned that in previous years under Reagan and previous presidents. It is a very difficult thing, even though it is very important to help alleviate the burden of tax complexity.
And on that point, what is your organization's view, and what are some suggestions that could potentially help simplify the tax code? Some of your suggestions here, and what could lower the burden on taxpayers, right?
Well, one of the most important things, at the end of 2025, which is coming up very, very fast, of course, we're going to see the expiration of a lot of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Once that expires, you're going to see many, many people, millions of people, shifting from using the standardized deduction, which is a much easier way of doing your taxes, to having to itemize their taxes. And that is when you really have to collect those receipts, collect and keep track of all of your expenditures and so forth, your charitable contributions, because that is required when you itemize your taxes. That will necessitate many people to do a lot more work to get their taxes done. So we need to preserve that larger standard deduction, the larger title tax credit, and other options, other provisions within the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, if we want to make sure that we keep the number of people that have to itemize their taxes as low as we possibly can to minimize the burden of taxation.
All right. Arnold, Brandon, NTUF, thank you very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.
And before we go, we also have some practical tax day tips for you. Right now, you have just hours left to file a return or request an extension. Otherwise, you might end up paying a fee. But it is possible to request an automatic 6-month extension for free on the agency's website. The deadline to request an extension is also today, and it involves paying estimated taxes. Now, residents of Maine, Massachusetts, and Washington, D.C. have an extra day or two for observed holidays. Also, for people in disaster areas or certain active duty military members, you also get more time to file. Also, if you know you're due for a refund, you have some wiggle room. The failure to file penalty won't apply to you. And that's all for today. Thank you very much for watching. If you have any feedback for the show, please feel free to let me know. And don't forget, business matters. Goodbye.